The moment you see the twisted metal of those tank cars, you understand how a placard indicating the hazardous material on board will not survive for more than a second in the kind of heat that this site created. It's one of the reasons why we called for railroad companies to proactively share more information on the hazardous materials on their trains moving through communities. That goes through a piece of software called Ask Rail. I think we need to raise the bar on what's expected and on what's required. But I think the railroad industry should be doing more out of the gate. Let me mention one other thing. We fund first responders. Matter of fact, through some of our programming, about 4,000 first responders in Ohio alone have been through the training on hazardous material. I think another thing we can do is continue to increase access so that we know they have access to that Ask Rail app and the funding they need and the training they need, as well as pushing the railroad companies to use it and proactively feed their information out there. So first of all, my colleague Michael Regan has made it very clear that Norfolk Southern will pay for this remediation. And the federal administration will be here to hold them accountable for that and make sure that they are making this community whole. Other federal resources include the presence of emergency management personnel, public health personnel. Let me mention one other thing that I saw state public health personnel doing in concert with the county and local leaders, which is making sure that they address the mental as well as the physical health effects of this. Because obviously you've got a community that has been through something that even as the air clears, even if the soil and water and air are continuing to be tested and shown to be clean, that's still going to affect their health in a different way. And I applaud everybody who is paying attention to that side. Sorry, there's a follow-up I just want to... Yeah. Well, that's just why we need to, that's a great example of why we need to make sure we have the strongest, toughest possible hand when it comes to dealing with these railroad companies. And to me, it's both specific to this location, which is that as long as Norfolk Southern is running trains on this track, and as long as anybody is feeling the impacts of this disaster, Norfolk Southern has to be there. Not just this year, not just when all the press are here, but every single day. But also, Norfolk Southern and the other freight rail companies need to stop fighting us every time we try to do a regulation in order to hold them accountable and their other railroad companies accountable for their safety record. And what we've seen is industry goes to Washington and they get their way. They got their way on the ECP rule. They got their way on a Christmas tree of regulatory changes that the last administration made on its way out the door in December of 2020. I think they're getting their way on the fines being too low. I'm sorry, but if the biggest fine we can charge on a violation is $250,000 or less, and that's an egregious hazmat violation to get somebody killed, that is not enough for a multi-billion-dollar company. Well, we're acting on it with the authorities we have, and calling on members of Congress to act on it with the authorities they have, and the railroads not to wait on us to require them to do the right thing on their own. Well, I will say this, you know, if you talk to the unions representing workers in the rail industry, number one thing they talk about when I'm with them, before they even get to wages and benefits, is safety. And they have weighed in on safety. Matter of fact, again, if you look at the record and comb through the fine print on the December 2020 rulemaking, under the last administration, there's a whole bunch of comments from labor on why they were concerned from a safety perspective, and then all of the rationale for why their concerns were overruled. We know that, for example, and this is one of the biggest things we're working on, we know that one safety issue is how many people are on a train. This one had 3 people on it, a trainee and 2 others. according to the NTSB report. And that's actually more than you sometimes get on a mile-long train. The railroad companies want to be able to take it down to one. One thing that workers have told us, unions have told us, and that we feel strongly about, is there needs to be an actual regulation on this. It was in the works. The last administration froze it. From the moment we got here, we've been resuming the work on advancing that regulation because it's an example of something that workers have been asking about that bears on safety. Again, I will stay out of NTSB's business on whether crewing and staffing, how that might have related to this case. Too early for me to go around making judgments on that. But we know that if you've got a train that's a mile long and something goes wrong halfway down it and you got one guy on there, that's going to be a problem. So this is where we've got to make sure that we have enough teeth in our regulations. Some of the things with the hot box detectors are not prescribed in the letter of the law. They're up to the railroad to decide. And I think we need to look at two things. One, did the railroad make the right decisions? That's part of the safety investigation. And then two, should we lay out a little more clearly what those decisions should be so it's not up to them? And that's the regulatory part. Look, again, I'm here for the work and not for the politics. You can sense when you talk to local leaders and local residents that they're getting pretty sick of the politics too. And this national ideological layer that's been added into all of this when they're just trying to figure out if they're going to be safe. And there's no question that there have been enormous amounts of both information and misinformation injected into this situation. None of which is to the benefit of the community when it comes to that misinformation. So I think, so I lost my train of thought. Well, that's what I had to say about that. I guess one other thing. If the same people who want to come here and play political games are the same people who sided with industry again and again and again and watered down rail regulations again and again and again, I want to see where they've had an actual change of heart or not. And if they had a change of heart, I'll take them at their word, and we can get work done. Yeah.
What assurance fire, and then when all the scammers are gone, all the politicians are left, they will actually be safe, will have the town back to where it was?
That's exactly why we're here. That's why we've been here from the first hours of the incident as an administration, and it's why our interest both in what happened here in East Palestine and in keeping our railroads safe doesn't go away when some other hot news story comes into the headlines. We're going to be here day in, day out, year in, year out, making our railroads safer and making sure Norfolk Southern meets its responsibilities. That is a promise and one I take very, very seriously. So you can see how hard people are working to clean up this site. And again, I met with some of the folks involved in that on everything from the testing to the remediation. And they are doing good work. They need to be supported. If at any moment we see any evidence that Norfolk Southern is backsliding on their commitments, or that anybody is not doing this by the book and then some, we're going to be there with any authorities that we have on the matter, and this whole administration will, because this is too important to let people down. So I want to make sure, get people who haven't asked before. Sorry.
Secretary.
Yeah. Well, one thing he could do is express support for reversing the deregulation that happened on his watch. I heard him say he had nothing to do with it, even though it was in his administration. So if he had nothing to do with it and they did it in his administration against his will, maybe he could come out and say that he supports us moving in a different direction. We're not afraid to own our policies when it comes to raising the bar on regulation. And I've got to think that him indicating that this is something that everybody, no matter how much you disagree on politics and presidential campaigns, can get behind. Higher fines, tougher regulations on safety, Congress untying our hands on braking rules, all the other things that go with that. That'd be a nice thing for him to do.
Secretary, how do you keep the companies from stopping to cut corners when it comes to safety? You know, talking to the unions, one of their biggest issues is just the sheer number of in-person safety workers.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, they pointed to how trains like this, there used to be like numbers of safety workers who would like go through and in-person inspect trains before they. How do you get companies from stopping cutting like large percentages of these safety workers?
Look, the reality is this is their entire business model. In the last few years, they have gone into a business model that is about cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting. And what has happened is it's a concern from a safety perspective. It has not made them more effective in delivering freight. We know that from our supply chain issues that we've seen. It has made them wildly profitable. So profitable that in my view, they could meet a much higher safety standard and still be profitable. And that's what really needs to happen next. So, you know, the reality is, if their business model is telling them to cut, whether it's cutting corners or cutting people, the only real wall we can put up against that is regulation. And I know the word regulation is not popular with some people, but we need enforcement, we need accountability, and that starts with making sure we have enough teeth in our regulations to actually see to it that that happens.
You've been Transportation Secretary for 2 years now. How long can you continue blaming the Trump administration?
Yeah. Yeah, look, I'm here focused on East Palestine, but there have been a number of incidents, derailments, and crashes that need attention, and it gives you if you look at the statistics, you get a sense of what we're up against, and specifically with Norfolk Southern, they need to lead the way in going above and beyond, especially after what happened here. They should have been doing it anyway, and some of their remediation responsibilities obviously is more on the EPA side, and I'd have to look to them in terms of what they can require. But what we're going to require is that they meet the highest standard on safety. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, one of the things that I've seen that the environmental folks on the ground here, both the state and EPA, are very focused on is, you know, not just getting through the next day or 2 days, but what happens as water moves through the soil, what happens as soil moves through the area, and what happens to the soil that's being removed. I don't have all of the details on that, but folks are right to be concerned and interested in that. Yeah.
Talking about regulation, regulatory changes, fine changes, these are things that are political to take maybe months to take place or to change. But anytime these trains are going through other communities in other states all over the country, so anything that the Department of Transportation, the federal government can do immediately, urgently, to maybe make things safer.
You know, one thing I've ordered FRA to do is stepped up inspection program, what we would call focused inspections on any of the routes that are of particular concern, either because of the nature of the cargo that's traveling there or because of some other community risk. They do a good job to begin with, but what we can do immediately is a level of elevated focused inspection based on what we've learned from this situation. Because you're exactly right. These regulatory processes can take forever. Something that railroad companies have taken advantage of, by the way, sometimes waiting out one administration to see if a more industry-friendly administration will come in and kill them. We're going to work as fast as we can on the regulatory side. We're not waiting for that. We're not waiting for an act of Congress. We're not waiting for a law to change to do the things that we can do with the powers that we do have. Well, they're right to be concerned. Look, some of these issues, health issues, environmental issues, they can last for years. They can last for decades. And there's really just two things I can say. First of all, we will never forget the people of East Palestine, and we will support them with everything we've got. But second, the best way to deal with an ecological disaster is to stop it from happening in the first place. And that's a big part of where my department comes in. And we take that very seriously. It's why we've laid out all those sets of things we're doing, things we want Congress to do, things we expect the railroads to do about that.
Hey, they play the rail on contaminated soil.
Say again?
Plan for soil that's underneath the rail where the trains are running right now.
Probably better to direct you to EPA for the details on that. But what I will say is my understanding is what you have here is what was needed in order to restore the supply chain and get things moving, but is not the long-term solution in terms of that. And obviously the contamination of the soil will be an issue there.
About whether better cars to transport the hazardous materials, and even talked about some of these being phased out. In Norfolk Southern, did they own these cars? Could they have had better transport vehicles to carry these?
Well, certainly I would urge Norfolk Southern and any other railroad to radically accelerate the adoption of these tank cars. It is a little complex. Often the tank cars are owned not by the railroad but by the chemical company. But the railroad can require that of the chemical company. And we're looking into what we can require of the chemical company sooner now that Congress kind of watered down the adoption date. So I guess what I'm saying is a both and, right? I think the railroad ought to require this right now, but we're going to make sure we require it on the legal side too. I won't weigh in on that until the NTSB has done their work. I think there's more analysis to be done there.
Secretary?
Talk about what stopped the DAT from, in the 2 years that you've been in office, from revisiting the ECP rule, or for that matter, from constitutes a high hazard.
Well, the top priority we've had on the regulatory side has been this staffing rule. We can't do everything all at once and realize that we would have to sequence the kinds of regulatory actions we take. And the one we were hearing the most about, especially from workers in the railroad industry, is this two-person crew rule. The other thing that makes it hard on the ECP rule is that Congress, remember, it didn't just get killed with a clean shot, so to speak. Congress basically moved the goalposts on the benefit cost analysis to make it very difficult to keep this rule on the books. And then the last administration went ahead and took it down. So I am asking my staff to conduct a stepped-up analysis on anything we may have missed, any angle that we weren't looking at, or anything that, for example, in a benefit cost analysis, might actually change now that we have the data, some of the data from this incident, that would empower us. But look, the cleaner way to do that would be for Congress to untie our hands so that we didn't have to go through all those hoops to begin with.
Secretary?
So I want to make sure we get some any here. Uh-huh. So again, NTSB should speak to some of what happened in particular in terms of the folks on board. But this is why I'm so frustrated that it's taken so much of our energy and political capital just to hold the line on there being two. I mean, the railroad industry wants to be able to have one person on trains that can be a mile long or longer. One. And there was movement to do something about that. Last administration froze it. Before this incident, and now we're still doing it, trying to bring that back.
So how big a problem is this crew staffing?
I think it's a real issue. And again, especially given the overall business model we've seen from the railroads, which is to cut and cut and cut, including cutting safety jobs, cutting maintenance jobs. The jobs on board are a little more tightly regulated. But if they could, I'm worried that they would.
All right, Secretary, please jump in. You guys only have about another minute. I want to get to somebody who hasn't asked a question yet. Anyone who has not asked a question. You're in the back of the green, please.
So this is a community that, first of all, it's a community full of good people who did nothing wrong. No one in this community asked to be in this situation. And they deserve not just the full force of the federal administration and the state government being there for them, not just Norfolk Southern doing the right thing and paying for the cleanup. They deserve a different level of support, a human level of support. The country should be wrapping their arms around the people of East Palestine, not as a political football, not as an ideological flashpoint, not as a gotcha moment, but as thousands of human beings whose lives got upended through no fault of their own. And I think that includes visits, not just big official visits from the government, but just people who've seen the news and whose hearts go out to the community here and can come here on a day like this when the sun is shining or on a rainy day and shop in those shops and visit those businesses. It is safe to visit here, as all of us can attest, even while we're still making sure that it stays safe to live here. And people deserve that. Yeah. I know they've got a lot of lawyers. I wouldn't speculate on their legal strategy. What I would say is they need to go way, way beyond the legal minimum here. And they need to lead the railroad industry, shifting its posture to stop fighting us tooth and nail every time we try to use the tools that we have as an administration to make freight rail safer.
Last question goes to the sir in the please, and that's it.
Secretary, the Department of Transportation is expected to have a ruling in March on LNG transport by rail. Has that decision been made yet? Do you worry that transporting LNG by rail car could lead to an even bigger disaster?
So I'm not ready to get ahead of a finalized rule or announcement there. What I will say is that this situation calls on us to re-examine everything that's been underway related to those issues. Now, what we found as we first looked at that LNG rule was that class of rail movement was unlikely, at least in the short term, to happen anyway. Nobody was seeking to use those kinds of cars. But we're setting policy for the long run. We've got to make sure we get it right. All right. Thanks, everybody, for being here.
All right, good to see you.
Oops.